Hey, my name is King, or as some of you might know me better, Israel. I've gotten around, but hopefully you recognize me from my own channel, King Tannic. There's a new show coming to the Burnettwork that I think is pretty exciting. Welcome to the Otaku Experience, hosted by yours truly. There is going to be a weekly series where we dive into the news and the world of anime, manga, and whatever the heck else Japan has to offer us. The show will be pre-recorded and premiere on Thursdays at 2 p.m. Pacific Time or 5 p.m. Eastern right here on the Burnettwork YouTube channel.
Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, Robert Meyer Burnett. I invite you to watch and listen to the Designing Hollywood podcast, brought to you by Martika Ibarra and the great, legendary Hollywood costume designer, Marilyn Vance. I am afforded the wonderful opportunity of co-hosting the show. If you are interested in the magic of Hollywood, the design of Hollywood, the clothes of Hollywood, watch the Designing Hollywood podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts from, or find the video version on the John Campea YouTube channel. That's right, the Designing Hollywood podcast. Why would you ever want to miss it? Especially if you love the movies.
Robservations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and of course, the as yet undefined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett. And this is Robservations episode number 836. Which, every time I say another number, they just go higher. I can't believe it. Welcome. This is a show. This show is basically born out of my experience over the weekend, and which is adjacent to the experience of my entire life. And lo and behold, it's about Star Trek, which is, I think if I had a PhD in anything, it would be in Star Trek. I actually know a friend of mine, Professor Thomas Parham, who used to live here, used to teach at Azusa Pacific. He moved to Florida. He actually did get his doctorate. He wrote his thesis on Star Trek: The Next Generation. I believe I have his thesis somewhere, Communications in the World of Star Trek. Fascinating thesis, beautifully written, well done. I think he published it. I think you can buy it. He gave me a copy of it. But anyway, now a lot of people have asked me, why have I not done a show, break out the champagne, and celebrate, dance on the grave of Star Trek Discovery? Because it was canceled after 5 seasons. And I'll tell you, I'm very happy for Brian Fuller, the original showrunner and the creator of Star Trek Discovery before it was sort of usurped. But he said to me, listen, my name's still on it as the creator, and I hope it runs 5 seasons. Well, Brian, you got your wish. Congratulations. I was talking about this today, and I've said this for my whole life. So I've told people famously that I started watching Star Trek when I was 5 years old. And that means it's when it was its first year of strip syndication, which is 1972 or thereabouts. And I grew up in Seattle, and I was very attracted to science fiction, fantasy, and horror from a very young age. And in addition, the same channel that showed Star Trek showed The Twilight Zone. It showed The Outer Limits. It showed on Sundays at 2 o'clock after I came home from Temple D. Hurst Sinai, where I went to Sunday school, they had sci-fi theater on. And that's where I saw, around the same time, I saw War of the Worlds, which was at the time my first favorite movie. Around that same time, I saw the first Planet of the Apes on TV, which I've told this story here, but a long time ago, about what that did to my brain seeing it for the first time. And the thing about Star Trek, and I know you old timers who've been here with me have heard me say this countless times. The thing about Star Trek, yes, it was a show that ran 79 episodes. Don't talk to me about the cage. All right. I don't know why. I don't know why the cage, a failed pilot that never actually aired on TV until 1988, it has become the basis of so much modern Star Trek. It's odd to me, but it has since 2009. But anyway, and I'll tell you right away, for those of you who want to watch Star Trek in continuity, do not watch The Cage. You are not watching it in continuity. The only way you should ever experience The Cage, if you are a true Star Trek fan, is within the context of the original series. You should see it as part of the Menagerie, parts 1 and 2. I mean, look, I'm being hyperbolic, but The Cage on its own was something that really no one was ever meant to see aside from its inclusion in the Menagerie parts 1 and 2. And I've tried to explain that to people because in our streaming world, people want to go back and watch from the beginning. The Cage was not the beginning of Star Trek. I mean, it was the beginning of Star Trek in the real world in that it was the first Star Trek shot. But it doesn't really count unless you're taking it in context of how it is presented in the Menagerie. Anyway, I know it's just me, but I think that so the thing about Star Trek for me was, as a storytelling medium, I've always looked at Star Trek as sort of like an anthology show, the same way Twilight Zone was, the same way Outer Limits was. It was an anthology show that had recurring characters because you never knew what kind of stories that you were going to get. I mean, for instance, early on, Gene Roddenberry sold Star Trek to the network as Wagon Train to the Stars. And indeed, early episodes of Star Trek, I can think of one, Harcourt Fenton Mudd, Roger C. Carmel, was introduced in an episode called Mudd's Women, where I kid you not, it was about the Enterprise. It was about intercepts Harry Mudd, and he's literally taking brides to miners. I mean, not like young people. I mean, miners, people that are actually mining on I think, Rigel. That was a Western plot. And it doesn't really fly today. But what made that episode interesting was these women took this Venus drug and it made them think that they were beautiful. And I think the interesting plot of that story is they didn't need it. You know, they thought they did, but they didn't, which was in a way a very Star Trekian story. So a story that is usually pointed at as an example of early Star Trek being sexist or misogynistic or a throwback to a different era actually does have a pretty interesting Star Trek plot, which was usually the case. One of the most notorious episodes of The Next Generation is an early episode called Code of Honor. You know, it's made fun of, but they basically go to the planet that is Africa and meet African tribespeople. And that show it's always held up as an example of racism, but I try and see the good in it. It actually is an interesting examination of a matriarchal society. So, you know, and so often people, the knee-jerk reaction is to not look closely enough, not really read the text, or look at the text in a different way. But, you know, obviously, I do not hold up Star Trek as being some sacrosanct storytelling medium that is beyond reproach, because I have been hugely critical of all Star Trek. As a matter of fact, I think one of the very worst episodes of not just Star Trek, but of television ever produced is the Star Trek episode from the 3rd season, And the Children Shall Lead. The famous episode where Melvin Belli plays Gorgon the Friendly Angel. Hail, hail, fire and snow. It's one of the most atrociously god-awful things that I've ever seen. And I'm embarrassed that it's part of the original series. But it is. Nothing's perfect, right? Nothing is perfect. And I've often said that one of the things people have to remember is what's unique about Star Trek, about the Star Trek franchise, is it was born out of, I was having a conversation recently, the other day, about, so the idea when John F. Kennedy was in the White House, they called it the Camelot White House, you know, King Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table, Camelot. But a young president who was helping, you know, the rise of the middle class, the greatest generation, at-home nesting. There were storm clouds gathering on the horizon. There were things in his presidency that obviously were very divisive, the Bay of Pigs, for instance. But we had civil rights, women's rights, And then, of course, the space program, he was really the person that kickstarted it. And he said things like, we do these things not because they're easy, but because they are hard. And indeed, we were able to get to the moon and accomplish a goal in under a decade. Now, I understand. I'm not a fool, and I do not have rose-colored glasses on all the time. I understand that beating the Russians to the moon was as much about politics as it was about anything else. But we still had incredible technology. As a matter of fact, if you want to watch something, if you've never seen the HBO miniseries From the Earth to the Moon, it's one of my favorite things that's ever been on TV. And the 5th episode, Spider, is very Star Trekian in that it's about Northrop Grumman and how they built the LEM, the Lunar Excursion Module. And I promise you, it's one of the great hours of TV that you'll ever watch. It's fantastic. I only wish that the Blu-ray restoration of the show was done with the same amount of care that the Next Generation's restoration was done. I wish the Akutas had worked on it, and I wish they did it correctly. But the Blu-rays are, I guess, better than nothing. But I don't usually say this, but watch it on standard def instead. It also has a great music score. But anyway, so the thing about Star Trek that was interesting to me as a kid is it fired my imagination, but because of the menagerie and why I'm adamant about people watching The Cage when it was broken up into the 2-part episode of The Menagerie is because what it did was it created lore, deep lore, for a television show at the time that didn't, lore was not something people were interested in. But here was an episode of Star Trek that established that the principal character, one of the principal characters, Spock, served on an earlier iteration of the Enterprise under a different captain and served under him for 11 years and change. We didn't know that, and that was shocking. And the sets looked different. The costumes looked different. A little bit of technology was different. So it created immediately a lineage. And when I was a kid, I loved when the Menagerie came on because you did get to see Pike. You did get to see Dr. Boyce. Where's Dr. Boyce in Strange New Worlds? Don't know. But anyway, he was Picard. He was Pike's best friend. And it was amazing. It was amazing to watch. It had great aliens, and you had multiple layers of Star Trek history in a 2-part episode. The only 2-part episode of the original series, which is pretty interesting. But it's an amazing piece of television. But as a kid, the idea that the Enterprise had a past and that it had a different captain was, to my young developing mind, quite significant. Because what it did was it told me as a viewer and as a child that there was a lot more going on in the Star Trek universe than we saw. And I was never more excited than when, say, the Defiant showed up in the Tholian web. Or the Omega Glory, when they find a starship orbiting a planet with all the crew powdered, turned into powder. Or the Ultimate Computer, where the Enterprise has to take on 4 other Constitution-class starships. And you met Bob Wesley. All of these things added to my young mind and my young imagination and my obsession with Star Trek. And then my dad would read to me out of the James Blish novelizations of the episodes. And it was great to grow up a Star Trek fan. And soon after I started watching it, the animated series debuted over 2 seasons, 22 episodes. And one of those, again, adding to the lore, was Yesteryear, written by the great Dorothy Fontana, where we went back into Spock's past through The Guardian of Forever. Mind-blowing. Loved it. And then, of course, Star Trek the Motion Picture in 1979, Star Trek II The Wrath of Khan in 1982, Star Trek III The Search for Spock in 1984, Star Trek IV The Voyage Home in 1986, The Next Generation debuted in 1987. And then, of course, we had Star Trek V The Final Frontier in 1989. In 1991, Star Trek VI The Undiscovered Country, Deep Space Nine in 1993, Voyager in 1995, Enterprise in 2001. So, for me, from 1972 to 2005, the Roddenberry Star Trek universe, and even Rick Berman and Brandon Braga, all the way to the end of Enterprise, which ended with a bad episode, but it was a Next Generation episode, in 2005. So for me, 1972 to 2005 was quite a journey in my own life. And as Star Trek evolved, I grew, I became a teenager. And all of that was very important to me. And it was a constant, look, Star Trek to me told me that to boldly go was not something I wanted to do in deep space. It was something I wanted to do in my own life. It was like, get a passport, boldly go to France, meet French girls. In my case, it was my first trip to Europe was Spain. And the first day I got there, I met a Spanish girl. Kirk would have been proud. And I went to Spain to take a feature film that I had written and directed, co-written and directed and edited, to Spain that was about my obsession with Star Trek. And William Shatner was in it. So, I mean, the whole thing was amazing. So my journey with the Star Trek franchise has been long, fruitful, and gratifying. Now, you've heard me go on and on and on and on and on about how Star Trek changed, but we're going to get into that in this article that I want to read. And I want to talk about what I believe has happened to the Star Trek franchise, which has not just happened to Star Trek, but has happened across the board. The rise of social media has exacerbated it, certainly. But, you know, I read a book by a guy named Yuval Harari that I've talked about a lot on this show, Sapiens. And it's basically 100,000-year history of mankind. It's wildly entertaining. He wrote a second book called Homo Deus that's worth reading as well. But at the end of Sapiens, where he basically takes us, it came out a couple of years back, but he takes us up to where humanity is now. And he asks a question at the end of Sapiens. And what I thought was interesting is that question, while never really stated in Star Trek, really, I think sort of encompasses the ethos of what Star Trek is all about. And what Star Trek was all about, what it was saying to us, the audience, through the stories that it was telling, is what is it that we, as a species, what do we want to be? Well, when we grow up, what do we want to be? There is one species of humanity on this planet. One. All of us are Homo sapiens. We are all human beings. There's only one species. We might have different ethnicities within that one species, but there's only one. And within us, within our species, as Dr. McCoy once said in Balance of Terror, oh, by the way, this was given to me. This shirt was, I don't know if it was made for me or I love this design. But there's only one of each of us. In the entire cosmic infinitude, there's only one of each of us. So theoretically, each one of us, you imagination connoisseur, you watching me right now, you're one of the most valuable commodities in the universe. In the universe. I know there might be 7 to almost 8 billion of us on this planet. But think about that. In the entirety of the universe, crazy, one of each of us. Anyway, I've often said that one of the great things about Star Trek is it's a product of the time in which it comes out. And Star Trek has grown, evolved, and changed as I have. And one of the things I really loved about the Star Trek feature films is how it incorporated, if the idea of television actors going on to front a $44 million, admittedly, it didn't really cost $44 million. They were wrapping in the development costs to everything all the way back to, they were going to make a movie called Star Trek Planet of the Titans. Toshiro Mifune was going to play a Klingon. Ken Adam was the production designer, and that's actually where the Discovery came from. The Discovery is drawn by Ralph McQuarrie. Yes, that Ralph McQuarrie. And Brian Fuller was going to make it be redolent of the original series. That was thrown out the window when Brian Fuller was given a heave-ho through the airlock along with Nicholas Meyer. But, fine. But then there was the Star Trek Phase 2 television series, and all of that, all the development costs of that were wrapped into the cost of Star Trek the Motion Picture. But anyway, as I've grown up, the characters grew up with me. William Shatner, on the 22nd of this month, is going to be 92 years old. 92. Go Bill. But literally my whole life, since I was cognizant of entertainment, Star Trek has been a part of my life. Now, while it's true that I have not liked, I call it the Great Star Trek Hostage Crisis, that has been taking place since 2009, actually 2007, when Bad Robot was awarded the franchise. There are people that their first experience with the Star Trek franchise, because they weren't born yet, was either with the Star Trek '09 films, Star Trek Into Darkness, Star Trek Beyond, or Star Trek Discovery in 2017, or Star Trek Strange New Worlds, or Prodigy, or Lower Decks, or Picard. And there are people that is how they came to the franchise. And just like I watched the franchise, and it was inspired by the world that hopefully Kennedy might have started, that world is long gone. And Star Trek has always reflected the time in which it was made. The Next Generation had Deanna Troi, a counselor on the bridge, in case you had mental issues or you needed to talk to someone. And she was so important to the ship that she was on the bridge. That was something that was definitely a reflection of the 80s. And nowadays, I mean, if you look at modern Star Trek, we have representation of groups that we'd never had before. All of these things are good. They're a part of what Star Trek has brought to all of us. It is now 57, well, it'll be 57 on September 8th of this year. It's extraordinary. But that said, first of all, I want to give a shout out to Mather Pfeifenberger. That's right, Mather Pfeifenberger from Washington, D.C. I'd already seen this article that I'm about to read to you, so sit back, grab a beverage, because we're going deep, we're going long, and we're going far. But Mather Pfeifenberger actually emailed me to make me aware of this article, so shout out to you, Mather. I very much appreciate you looking out for me. So here is the article that I want to read to you. It is called Sad Trek, and it was written in the spring of 2022. It's a review. It's at the New Atlantis. It was written by Alan Rome, who is writing from Australia. So again, I read this article, and I have to say this very much encompassed, pretty much to a T, my feelings about Star Trek. All of Star Trek. And I figured I'd share it with you because it's long and people probably won't read the whole thing. But I'm going to. So, Alan Rome, I hope you don't demonetize my channel for reading your article. But I will opine. And I should say both the Super Chat and tip feature are open. The tip feature you can see in the description. And obviously, if you know how to use Super Chats, I welcome any and all commentary, including if you want to tell me I'm an asshole and you don't appreciate what I have to say about Star Trek. I mean, one of the things, all I posted was finally in the Deadline article. I will say this. It is disappointing to me whenever I talk about Star Trek Discovery. It is the only thing really on my feed that I get personally attacked about from people. I mean, they say horrible shit about me. It's okay. I'm a big boy. I can take it. I just find it interesting that it's those Star Trek fans that resort almost immediately to personal attacks. I'll tell you an interesting story. So when Discovery first came out, there was a producer on it named Ted Sullivan. And he and I had some beef on Twitter. We went back and forth, not just about Star Trek, but about other things. And I wasn't nice. And I ran into him at Comic-Con. And at a party, it was at the Hilton, or the new Hyatt, right across the street from Hall H. And we were all at the bar at a party, and I saw him there. And I'd never met him in person. And I walked up to him, and I introduced myself, and I explained who I was. And, he didn't know what I was going to say, and I apologized to him. And I said that, I was a dick. And he shook my hand. We actually had a really nice conversation, and he told me his experience with the franchise growing up and how much he and his brother love the franchise. And it was a very nice conversation. And I felt, kind of like a tool for being such an ass. But, that's what we do on Twitter, I guess. But anyway, let me get into this article. The New Atlantis, Sad Trek, How an Exhausted Liberalism Killed Sci-Fi's Sunniest Franchise. If the future is anything to go by, the Republic is in trouble. In the 24th century, Captain Picard explores the galaxy as a representative of the United Federation of Planets, a liberal technological utopia of freedom, equality, and prosperity. Yet, by the 32nd century, Commander Burnham faces a collapsed Federation, unsure of its ideals and suffering an environmental catastrophe. These two different images of the future come from different parts of the Star Trek franchise, from when Captain Picard debuted in 1987 in Star Trek The Next Generation to Commander Burnham's first appearance in 2017 in Star Trek Discovery. The future has become freighted with pessimism, not mainly due to a change in creative vision, but rather to America's changing conception of itself. Star Trek's evolving understanding of liberal ideology, its visions of utopia, history, and otherness, reveal America's gradual loss of faith in liberalism itself. The Star Trek franchise began in the Cold War, with gleaming hope that liberalism would triumph throughout the galaxy. Now the show is clouded with cynicism about race, technology, and the environment. The vast Star Trek franchise can be seen as emerging in three distinct waves, each corresponding to a different cultural moment. The first TV show, now known as the original series, was a sci-fi refraction of the genres of westerns and naval exploration. Running from 1966 to 1969, it saw Captain Kirk and the crew of the Starship Enterprise on a mission of exploration of strange new worlds and split infinitives. Each episode would see Kirk, Spock, Bones McCoy, and their comrades engaging in fantastical adventures with a new species on new planets, and Kirk doffing his shirt to fight the natives or bring them to freedom. The creator of the show, Gene Roddenberry, took his ideological bearings from the Kennedy and Johnson era progressive liberalism. America's world historical struggles against first fascist and then communist totalitarianism were reflected in the Federation's tensions with the alien Klingon and Romulan empires, even if the show was generally critical of aggressive foreign policy. In the classic episode Balance of Terror, for instance, a World War II-style game of cat and mouse between the Enterprise and a Romulan ship leads both sides to a mutual recognition of each other's nobility. In another life, I could have called you friend. The show likewise drew much of its cultural force from the social and scientific ferment of the time. The existential threat of nuclear weapons, the Baconian awe of the space race, the socio-political struggles over civil rights in the Vietnam War, and it became admired for its progressive optimism about a peaceful and prosperous future, reflected above all in its multiracial crew in an era of network TV when segregation was still often the rule. While canceled after only 3 seasons, the original Star Trek gathered an intense following, fostered by reruns, a short-lived animated series and a sequence of films. A new wave, the second wave, began with The Next Generation from 1987 to 1994, followed by a spate of spin-offs in Deep Space Nine from 1993 to 1999, Voyager from 1995 to 2001, and Enterprise from 2001 to 2005, and another series of films. The Next Generation, initially overseen by Roddenberry, repeated parts of the formula of the original series, but was set some 100 years later, with a new crew led by Captain Picard. It was described by critic Naima Jerome as one part Margaret Mead among the Samoans and one part undergraduate ethics course. I like that. In contrast to the original series, this second wave's defining context was the short-lived liberal triumphalism at the end of the Cold War, triumphalism, and represented in the uneasy but durable new galactic peace between the Federation and the Klingon Empire. History's long unfolding of the enlightened mind had finally come to fruition, but reflecting contemporary changes in progressive ideology, the Next Generation took a more pluralist stance, more skeptical about the universal claims of liberal dogma. Picard, for instance, in an episode tellingly titled Ethics, rebukes his second-in-command Riker for having a very human perspective in taking a principled stand against the Klingon requirement of suicide for paraplegics. This skeptical tone became increasingly evident as the spin-off series grew darker and distanced themselves from the more utopian aspects of the original conception. Deep Space Nine, for instance, took inspiration from post-colonial thought, with a plotline about the planet Bajor recovering from a brutal occupation. All of these shows, nevertheless, possessed a fundamental continuity of vision in their humanistic progressivism. The Liberal Federation was a perpetual force for good in the galaxy, possessing the key to a material abundance and the universal values of freedom and tolerance. And almost every leading character in every series was driven by an unambiguous moral righteousness and nobility of spirit. This continuity was broken with the third wave, launched by J.J. Abrams' 2009 reboot film, Star Trek. Abrams infamously claimed in an interview that he, quote, never got Star Trek, unquote. Obviously so. In his hands, the franchise became a more generic version of the space fantasy Star Wars. More telling, however, has been the suite of new shows, especially Star Trek Discovery, which premiered in 2017, and Star Trek Picard launched in 2020. These reflect the more pessimistic, progressive sentiments of the post-Trump era, a recessive liberalism weighed down by social conflict, government failure, and a newfound difficulty in plausibly hoping that the future will be better. From the start, an underpinning of utopianism provided the philosophical and moral structure for the franchise and its characters. In Star Trek's future, the United Federation of Planets is a liberal democratic regime encompassing hundreds of different alien species, all devoted to peace, freedom, and equality. The Federation is the United Nations writ galactic, led by an Americanized humanity. It possesses a post-scarcity economy where there is no poverty, inequality, or social conflict. Technological progress has allowed food materials to literally appear out of thin air from replicators. In a future where, as Picard states, material needs no longer exist. Life's challenge has become to improve yourself, to enrich yourself. People, in an almost Marxist conception of the future, are liberated from the drudgery of labor, free to fulfill their higher callings, whether they be scientific exploration, civic duty, or creative expression. The crew of the Enterprise have embraced discipline and danger for the sake of scientific curiosity, galactic peacekeeping, and, up to a point, a humanitarian mission. We may trace some of this utopian vision back to the beginnings of modernity itself, to modern philosophy's promise to transform human life permanently for the better by mastering the whims of chance. In the realm of nature, Bacon and Descartes established a scientific process for the improvement of the human condition through the discovery of nature's secrets and their exploitation for technical advancement. In the realm of politics, Machiavelli, Hobbes, and Locke attempted to free humanity from superstition and oppression by advocating for political institutions that could channel the ineradicable selfishness of human nature in benevolent outlets. That was a tough sentence to say. It was arguably this pessimistic view of humanity that inspired the founding of the United States. Rather than expecting political conflict and division to be resolvable, the founders attempted to rationally design a regime to manage them. But like most utopias, Star Trek abandoned the hard-headed realism of this classical liberal tradition, which refused to imagine republics and principalities that have never been seen or known to exist, as Machiavelli put it. Star Trek instead took its bearings from the latter 20th century progressivist evolution of liberalism, where progress came to be seen not only as a matter of technological or political improvement, but of boundless moral improvements too. For Gene Roddenberry, humanity is an incredible species, but it has so far been stuck in its childhood. We're growing up. We're moving into adolescence now. When we grow up, man, we're going to be something. Thus, in the series premiere of The Next Generation, Picard defends humanity against the godlike being Q by claiming that humanity has evolved away from its behaviors of centuries past. There are even hints, such as in the Voyager episode Death Wish, that the Q race had evolved out of their material limitations into creatures of pure spirit, suggesting perhaps a picture of where liberal progress is ultimately headed. Roddenberry's initial conception for The Next Generation was that human consciousness in the future would have transcended all negative emotions and hence human nature as we knew it, an idea that was understandably resisted by the writing staff and soon quietly dropped on the reasonable grounds that compelling drama needs conflict. Star Trek retained its optimism in the late 80s, though, increasingly under this rather Hegelian conception of history as the unfolding of enlightened self-knowledge. As long as the Cold War lasted, the show's liberal federation needed to battle ideological rivals, or rather their stand-ins, the Klingons. But by the second wave, that need had passed. Even though The Next Generation premiered before the fall of the Berlin Wall, already it offered the telling symbol of a Klingon, Lieutenant Worf, on the Enterprise bridge crew. By the way, that was not something, while it was a very late addition to Next Generation, even Gene Roddenberry, almost up to his death, never considered Worf a member of the principal cast. He was a recurring character. The era of the franchise emerged alongside the collapse of the communist world. Immersed in a spirit of liberal triumphalism, briefly proclaimed as the end of history, as Francis Fukuyama famously called it. Fukuyama heralded the universalization of Western liberal democracy as the final form of human government. We had reached the end of the millennia-old unfolding of the human spirit as it sought its own self-consciousness and realization. The passage of time would continue, but it would now lack the tragic inner necessity of historical conflict. All that would remain would be the practical realization of the universal idea of liberalism, the slow overcoming of pockets of local resistance. By the 1990s, then, the future utopia of the Federation had already come to exist, at least in its infancy, in the real world. It required no further political struggle to be achieved. All it lacked was futuristic technology. This end of history, as Paul Cantor has brilliantly written in his essay, Shakespeare and the Original Klingon, was most explicitly explored in the 1991 movie Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country, which focused on the signing of a peace between the Federation and the Klingon Empire, and thus depicted in analog the triumph of America over its ideological rival. This optimism ran more generally throughout the second wave of the franchise, especially in its complacent assumption of the literal universality of the Federation's liberal ideology. This was seen above all in the seemingly inevitable and desirable expansion of the Federation across the galaxy. A constant theme was that myriads of worlds across the galaxy wanted to apply for membership in the Federation, mirroring the millennial hopes for a post-national liberal regime such as the European Union and United Nations. The challenges around Bajor's application providing a unifying plot thread across all 7 seasons of Deep Space Nine. Despite its optimistic instincts, the second wave also implicitly raised the specter of Nietzsche's last man. People of the future who, no longer having any ideals to fight for, inured to comfort and security, and they lacked genuine greatness. As Fukuyama lamented, in the post-historical period, there will be neither art nor philosophy, just the perpetual caretaking of the Museum of Human History. Just so, in The Next Generation. This is a very important point that I really agree with. Yes, freed from want, the crew members paint, perform in symphonies, stage plays, do yoga, read, and generally better themselves. But these figure largely as hobbies, exercises in roundedness, high creativity, the kind that even in these characters inspires awe, seems mostly to be the product of past or alien cultures, not of present humanity. Picard, as the most humanistic and cultured of the characters, dwells in the past, with his love of pre-21st century literature, classical and jazz music, history, and the traditional production of wine in the French countryside. Now, first of all, Picard wasn't really the jazz fan, it was Riker, and Picard wanted to get away from his fucking vineyard. So I gotta stop him there, but I just want to throw that in there. All of the characters are faced with a postmodern bricolage of history and culture. Freed by time travel and holographic technology, they can visit any moment of history, abstract it out from the context that gave it meaning, and use it for their own purposes. But they cannot create anything substantial of their own. Yet Star Trek manages to cheat history of its finality. By the way, I think this point is not necessarily true, even though I think it's a great point, because we meet great scientists and people throughout the history of Star Trek that are trying to create things that haven't been created yet. Propulsion systems, computer systems, Richard Daystrom, the duotronic circuit, trans-warp drive, or other kinds of warp drives we saw in Where No One Has Gone Before, the episode from the first season of Next Gen. So there are people that are trying to push the boundaries of knowledge, but we don't see our regular crew members do it. It was always some guest star. Yet, Star Trek manages to cheat history of its finality. Post-historical humanity no longer internally faces interminable political conflict, but does externally in the infinite number of other species and regimes of the galaxy that remain incorrigibly historical. The Republic must eternally renew itself in its confrontation with outsiders. The original series reflected the tensions within a dogmatic liberal foreign policy, the need to make the galaxy safe for American-style liberalism. In its quest, the Enterprise ultimately became another vehicle for liberal evangelism. While the show recognized the evil consequences of the age of exploration, it sidestepped any notions of European moral culpability or agency by suggesting that the destruction of alien ways of life was the inevitable consequence of their contact with superior forms of civilization. This is precisely the import of the Prime Directive, one of the foundational principles of the Federation's Defense Force, Starfleet, which forbids interference with the internal affairs of other people, especially more primitive ones. Species must be protected in order to let their process of development unfold organically. Yet, this rule was more honored in the breach than in its fulfillment. As Cantor points out in his essay, Kirk's mission seemed really to be to seek out new civilizations and destroy them if they contradict the principles of liberal democracy, and to eliminate any vestiges of aristocracy or theocracy in the universe. When the Utopian Federation encounters competing utopias, they must be crushed in the name of freedom and equality. In The Next Generation and Trek's second wave, the Prime Directive became an increasingly inviolable principle. Thus, Picard in the episodes Homeworld and Pen Pals was even prepared, slightly confusedly, to allow entire peoples to perish, rather than risk culturally contaminating them. This reflected a growing skepticism about the universality of liberalism, though one still ultimately underlaid by an implicit conviction of the truth of many progressive dogmas, including the moral absolutes of pluralism and toleration. The increasing ideological tensions in America's conception of itself came to the fore in the portrayal of alien races, precisely because they were meant as metaphors for cultural difference. The aliens, with their caricatured prosthesis, strange costumes, and rituals, often represented mere exaggerations of liberal vices or virtues. There was little room in the depiction of alien races of the next generation for real spiritual difference, for genuinely alien consciousness, ways of life, or conceptions of the good. The Ferengi were caricatured hyper-capitalists with a mincing gait and large ears, whereas the truly villainous Borg, the ultimate technocratic collectivity, obliterated all individual difference. Even the Klingons, as supposed stand-ins for the communists, were transmuted from ideological rivals in the original series to atavistic representations of, atavistic representations of a warrior aristocracy and traditionalism in the next generation. Indeed, this built-in obsolescence, it's tough to read sometimes, became a constant justification of rogue Klingon villains during the second wave, seeking to subvert the decadent peace that reigned in the galaxy. Star Trek's cosmopolitanism was literally cosmic in scale, and yet even its inclusion of post-human beings did not stray far from the ideals that were comfortable to end-of-history Americans. In The Next Generation, the sentient android Data, a slightly transmogrified Spock figure, played with consummate cosmic timing by Brent Spiner, emerges out of the long literary tradition of outsiders who complicate the boundaries of the given and the commonplace. To the human viewers, the effect is often funny, often touching, and never especially alienating. For Data is driven by an intense desire to realize his humanity, which of course means the particular liberal version of humanity that underlines the show. He pursues a professional career, picks up hobbies and a pet cat, Spot, and eventually gets in touch with his feelings. The theme emerges again in later shows such as Voyager, where the holographic Doctor strives to be an autonomous individual. In the future, the technological singularity is content to be comic relief. Sentient technology is depicted not just as benevolent and easily regulated, but as having a built-in telos toward liberal humanism. Nevertheless, Star Trek at its best has resisted to do all genuine works of art the ideological frame imposed upon it. The slightly incoherent pluralism of The Next Generation, its denial of the universality of liberal values, was driven by a deeper version of those very values. Paradoxically, it gave it the moral and intellectual space to aspire to the philosophical. Often driven by wonder, The Next Generation tried to use its sci-fi premises to distance itself from the social realities and ideological certainties of the present. And in the first two waves, the nature of the Enterprise's adventurous quest sat in fruitful tension with liberal assumptions. Kirk was heroic, fighting hostile aliens bare-chested and bare-knuckled. So was Picard, played by Patrick Stewart, as wise, stentorian, and stern, driven by a deep passion for goodness, truth, and beauty. The crew, broadly, were driven by the pursuit of virtuous excellence, by a devotion to honor, community, and truth that denied their status as last men. People still loved, fought, and died trying to realize their higher selves. Today, we are amid the third wave of Star Trek, and it offers us no vision of the future worth longing or hoping for. The most prominent current series, Discovery, shows no interest at all in discovery or in science, wonder, or philosophical reflection. It represents a new type of cultural myopia and chauvinism, different from that seen in the original series, in its total closure to worlds outside the ones run by its protagonists. Indeed, it seems not even to recognize the existence of alternative conceptions of the world. The one major new alien species fully introduced in the series, the Kelpians, do not enjoy the kind of world-building given to the Vulcans, the Romulans, or Klingons, only a crude morality story about oppressors and oppressed. Far from the literary pretensions of the earlier waves, this show struggles to achieve anything more than violent spectacle leavened with sentimentality and generic tropes. He said it. While Discovery's third season is set in a distant future where the Federation has all but collapsed, the first two seasons are set during the supposed historic height of the utopia, and yet lack any recognition of it. The show evinces no interest in any positive aspects of the Federation, nor do its characters seem to be driven by any higher principles or ideals. Discovery has quietly abandoned the moral superiority of the future. The barely developed characters are almost entirely unlikable, highly flawed, some explicitly mentally ill, others ill-tempered, bickering, ruthless, or vain. Captain Lorca, a character from the first season, turns out to be his own evil doppelganger from the Mirror Universe. Lieutenant Stamets's persistent meanness is played as dramatically redeemed by his being the first openly gay character of the franchise. The names of many of the bridge crew are likely unknown to any but the most dedicated of viewers, and they are comically ready to violate command hierarchies whenever their personal judgment requires. Whereas in the earlier waves of Star Trek, the ideals of equality and freedom had triumphed and become permanently available to all, these ideals are now fragile and ephemeral, relative products of a particular time and place, lacking any real grounding and perhaps any desirability. They are under siege, whether by Trump-era fears of violent messianic religious figures and white supremacists, the Klingon T'Kuvma and Captain Lorca respectively in Season 1, the very technology that was meant to facilitate utopia, the galaxy-destroying data-gathering technologies of Season 2, or environmental disasters, the burn of Season 3, which caused mass death and crippled interstellar travel. This conflict-ridden, crisis-driven Federation is not a place where anyone would choose to live. This abandonment of Star Trek's utopian pretensions is not due just to poor writing, or to the inevitable fatigue of a long-running franchise. We can see it in the genuinely good first season. Now, I'm not saying I agree with this. I'm just going with the writers writing this. We can see it in the genuinely good first season of Star Trek Picard, which was created in part by Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist Michael Chabon. This show remains anchored by the character of Picard in humanism and wonder, yet this makes its disillusionment with liberal premises and promises even starker. Set 20 years after his last appearance, Admiral Picard has resigned from Starfleet in protest against its failure to live up to its ideals, its increasing corruption and xenophobia in the face of a massive refugee crisis from the planet Romulus. The great statesman has, like the great in all periods of political turpitude, retired from public life. Once the plot develops, Picard operates with a private crew outside of official Aegis, just like in Discovery. The good can only emerge now in defiance of the regime. This new wave of Star Trek is internally consistent, then, in harboring a pessimistic view of the future, one that seems to emerge from a particular contemporary sensibility. Implicit in these shows is a sense of the end of history as overdeveloped cul-de-sac, a place that is bleak but offers nowhere else to go. In these visions of the future, consciousness has indeed reached its final stage, which is not rational self-realization, but the recognition of history's true nature as a long series of oppressions. People seek emancipation from this oppression to fulfill their authentic group identity. In a permanent reification of difference, sexual and racial identities are treated as changeless through the ages. Life remains a perpetual power struggle between these incompatible identities and ways of life, whose standpoints are relative and incapable of transcendence by universal reason. Government is somehow both the only possible guarantor of justice and also structurally implicated in all social evils. The current system is therefore illegitimate and needs to be dismantled in favor of some sort of utopian solution. But this utopia no longer has a clear content, such as that provided by Marxism or earlier forms of progressive liberalism. Ultimately, there is little hope of its realization, nor even desire for it. No matter how far we go into the future, the ideal society remains a mirage on the temporal horizon, and not even Picard can make it so. Again, this was an article in the New Atlantis. It was published in 2022, and it was written very well, I thought, by Alan Rome. Now, let me put this article in the chat, and I'll also put it in the actual, so it's in the live chat right now. So if you want to copy that or look at it, and I'm going to put that here, Alan Rome's essay, And I'll put that also, if you want to find that link, it is down in the description. Now, here's the thing. For me, one of the things about Star Trek is that, yes, as this article pointed out, Star Trek is very much an American colonial view of the future. I mean, it is. It was born out of a time when the greatest generation had helped defeat one of the greatest evils humanity had ever seen, the Nazi regime of Germany, and fascism that threatened to consume all of us, and also what Japan was doing, the Axis powers. I mean, it was born out of that sort of, in a way, that naive can-do spirit that was part of the American experience. But that's what made it great, and I think that's what it appealed to many people of the time, especially college students and people that were looking as the world seemed increasingly descending into bleak. The assassinations of Kennedy, of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, of Bobby Kennedy. I mean, these figures that inspired young people to push forward to a future that may now never come. Star Trek still was a beacon of hope that, yeah, we're going to get there. We're going to get there. And it was a very American brand of the future, which is the reason why Star Trek doesn't travel well, especially to Asian countries. Because Star Trek basically says, yeah, we're America. Let us lead you all into the future. Follow us. And I can understand why a lot of people don't dig it. They like it in the UK, and of course certain European countries dig it too. But there's a lot of people that don't, and I totally understand it. It's an idealized future that might not ever come to pass. One of the reasons that I've said that I really hated Star Trek Discovery, I mean, I disliked it a lot in its first 2 seasons, but I developed an intense hatred for it when they went to the 31st century, because it showed such a lack of imagination when postulating what that future might be. I mean, basically somebody said, yeah, man, somebody probably watched The Road Warrior and said, what if the future had the most precious thing was gasoline, which is basically what they did. And look, one of the great things about science fiction as a genre, what makes it so great, especially when you're reading stories of the future, is it extrapolates upon our technology today. And what would that technology be like, or what would we be like because of this evolving technology 1,000 years from now? You know, I've often postulated, for instance, that obviously one of the big social talking points. I mean, Michael Knowles. I watched him basically say the other day that trans people shouldn't be allowed to exist. Now, my point of contention when it comes to, I know trans people, and I know that they're real. And I honestly believe that just like other things, when you're born the way you're born. And I do think that real trans people are born that way. And why not? There's all other kinds of differences in humans when they're born, all different kinds of, call them anomalies if you want, but maybe people would be not like that. Like, you can be born with more fingers or toes. That's an anomaly, because if you look at it statistically, an anomaly is something that doesn't fit with the statistics. But I would think, for instance, that 1,000 years from now, anybody that was born trans, they would be able to actually look at your brain. They'd scan your brain and be like, oh yeah, you have the brain of a woman's brain. You're in a man's body. You have a female brain in a male body. And with the technology, I don't know if they could do brain transplants because it didn't work out too well in Spock's brain, but maybe transition, make it easier medically. So 1,000 years in the future, what would that look like? What would it look like? I would believe also that we would be using biotechnology that would extend our lifespans. Human beings would live, say, 1,000 years, maybe 10,000 years. It is 1,000 years from now, and with our medical technology, the same way that trans people could transition very easily, and it could actually be, you could actually see that, yes, in fact, you were born in the wrong body. If you wanted to improve your biology through technology, whether it's nanoprobes or whatever, something like that would happen. So the human beings of 1,000 years from now would not be the same kinds of human beings that are in our universe or the Star Trek universe. And I found when Discovery went into the future, it was disappointing how none of these kinds of things was really addressed. As a matter of fact, one character was still demanding the use of pronouns in the future. And once we're a spacefaring race where people are intermarrying alien species. I mean, one of my favorite episodes of Enterprise is called Cogenitor, where we meet a very affable alien species, the Enterprise crew does, that they've never met before. And it turns out that they need 3 genders in order to reproduce. And one of the genders by this civilization is basically a third-class citizen. Isn't educated. They just use this third gender to reproduce, and they don't allow this third gender to develop as an individual. And it's a fascinating science fiction story. And of course, Trip Tucker gets involved, and it is a very compelling episode of Star Trek. If you haven't seen it, because it's both very optimistic and happy, but it takes a very dark turn. In a very Star Trekian way, when Trip Tucker makes a decision. Well, I'll leave you to discover it for yourself if you've never seen the episode, but it's one of my favorite, indeed, not just one of my favorite episodes of Enterprise, it's one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek. And I think that, now our world has changed a great deal when it comes to what we think and what we believe and what we want. And I'll tell you, I mean, what I see is a push forward. There are a lot of people in our world today, a lot of voices that we haven't heard from, a lot of people that have been marginalized, and they're standing up and demanding to be heard. And I'm all for that. The motto of this channel is every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. But I don't think that it's one thing to allow voices to be heard, which I think is great. But now we're in a position where people want to be heard, and they don't care if they're trampling over other people to get their voices heard. You can't replace one oppression with another. And the thing about Star Trek is, as a future, the future I wanted to believe in, is that we would all move forward together and leave our pasts behind. Because if you want blood, if you're gonna play that game, and for all of history, you want people to pay, where does it end? I mean, we already see it all around the world. When are we going to have peace? And we're not going to have peace while we demand blood for blood. And in the Star Trek universe, that has sort of gone away. And now I'm seeing, like, I can't even say I don't like Star Trek Discovery without somebody calling for my literal blood, maybe not to be killed myself, but they'd love it if my career was destroyed, my livelihood was gone, and I went away forever. Certainly there's that sentiment there. I hate that person. What can I do to see that person destroyed? That's where we're at. That's where our social media, where it's anathema to me. I can't believe that we are here, and especially Star Trek fans. Like, one of the funny things to me about Star Trek fandom is that we used to get in knockdown, drag-out arguments, whether it was online and before that at Star Trek conventions or whatever, about warp drive and shields and Spock's parentage and just anything. But as much as we might yell at each other, there was still love because we all love Star Trek, all in all of its myriad forms. Now what I find interesting was, look, I did not watch Star Trek to see myself reflected in the characters. I wanted to watch Star Trek to see characters that I aspired to one day be. And all of the characters in Star Trek were like that. And that's what I really think that Star Trek is all about. Now, I think it's great. We live in a world now where there's a lot of people that never saw themselves on TV before, and certainly not in the future of Star Trek. One of the things that Whoopi Goldberg says about Nichelle Nichols, when she was a girl and saw that Nichelle Nichols was on the command bridge of the Enterprise, part of the command crew, was that for her, wow, there are black people in the future. That was something up to a point you didn't see a lot of in 60s sci-fi and the sci-fi before that. It was a very homogenized future, and it wasn't looking good for our black brothers and sisters. And so when you see Nichelle Nichols on the bridge, and what was so great is if you watch the first episode that was shot after Where No One Has Gone Before, which was the second pilot, the first time Kirk is introduced, the first production episode was the Corbomite maneuver. And you see Lieutenant Uhura, I mean, albeit she's wearing gold, and she looks great in gold, by the way. She's wearing a gold tunic, a command tunic instead of red, which is basically services. But that was making a statement. A statement was being made. And the same way that now we see other kinds of people, Stamets and Culber, not only do we see two gay men, but they're in a functioning, loving relationship. This was something that Star Trek had never seen before, or never had before, and I'm all for it. I'm all for seeing different kinds of representation. The problem is that, like this article points out, the representation is replacing the imagination and the writing that we came to expect from the very best of the franchise. Even a cursory understanding of the internal makeup of a starship was missing from something like Discovery. And I think that comes just because Star Trek, again, the people that were writing the original series were novelists and playwrights and TV writers. They were true writers in the sense that they worked in many different mediums. And a lot of them were World War II veterans, including Gene Roddenberry. And I think that what Star Trek really needs to move forward is it needs to chart a new path forward to relevance. And its mission in life should not be to try and right the wrongs of the past, but to actually move forward and present a plausible future we can all move forward in and move forward toward together. And at the same time exploring, what does technology mean for the future of the human species? It's interesting. One of the, I think, great failings of everyone talks about the Borg. The Borg were the great. I always thought, to be honest, the Borg were pretty stupid. When we first saw them, Maurice Hurley created the Borg, and the idea cyborg, and there were Cybermen and all that. But what was really interesting is, and the thing that made them so unique, especially as adversaries, is when we first met them, they didn't care about us. They wanted to strip mine our culture, take what they needed. If there was technology we had, they would incorporate it as part of their own and move forward. But it wasn't a society. It was basically a mechanized plague of locusts. And what I love that. It was like the Borg were like a natural disaster. And I always thought that the Borg were probably a product of, and they never delved into this. They never went into this, but I always wanted them to. I always thought that, imagine if you're a civilization like us, and we were trying to improve ourselves, to expand our lifespans or extend our lifespans and live forever. Imagine if that's what we wanted to do, and we did that through mechanical implants or whatever, and combine it with our fear of AI. But something happened. Something happened, and there was some kind of a disaster. Something happened that we weren't. And so instead of a zombie virus, and instead of like Colossus or Proteus or HAL, take your pick, whatever your favorite cinematic megalomaniacal computer is. I like Colossus. He's pretty big now, but I like Colossus. I like Proteus too, because basically he wanted to have sex with Julie Christie, and he did, and he procreated. If you haven't seen Demon Seed, check it out. But by the way, Warner Archive put it out on a beautiful Blu-ray. So I always thought that the Borgs, they could have developed the Borg as a mirror for us, a cautionary tale about where our self-improvement, and Star Trek does a lot of that, how mechanization can while it gives us immortality, can also strip us of our souls. And one of my favorite things, I'm so tired of this. I get this, probably not nearly as much as Terry Metalis is tired of this, but everybody is always talking to me, well, Rob, I'm not going to watch Picard season 3 because Picard's a robot. Look, I'm going to say this. Maybe this will be the last time I say this. I'm sure it won't be until tomorrow. I'll say it again. Star Trek always, all the way back to the first season episode, What Are Little Girls Made Of? Always talked about the idea of building android or bodies, whether they might as well be replicants, which are biological, and I only do eyes. Call it what you want. But these are replicant bodies or facsimile human bodies that our souls, our brain patterns are scanned into, and we live forever. Dr. Roger Corby had perfected using alien technology, had perfected the process. And you see this in the first half of the first season of the original series, and it's just horrifying when Christine Chappell, his fiance, discovers he's a robot. But he's not a robot like Ash is a goddamn robot from Alien. I mean, this technology makes somebody indistinguishable. So yes, the Jean-Luc Picard we know and love died. His body died, but his essence, his brain patterns or whatever were put into a positronic body. Okay. Look, I found that as offensive as anyone else. They killed Picard. I thought that was the stupidest shit ever. I thought the Cthulhu, look, all the things that happened in the first season of Picard are written by people that haven't read science fiction. So the ramifications of it all were difficult to deal with. But that said, you got to move forward. Picard is still Picard. He's still functioning. And yet, yeah, he's now a robot. But I mean, a smart person would get past that and be like, okay, it's another personal attribute. That's all you can do. That's all to move forward. Now, one of the reasons, people are always asking me, I went on a limb. I've seen Star Trek Picard all the way through 3 times. I've watched the first 3 episodes of the season now, probably like 6 or 7 times each, because I like it. But why do I like it? Why do I like Star Trek Picard so much? Because, and everybody's saying this to me, like, these characters aren't acting like the way they were in Next Generation. Of course not. It's been 25 years. I mean, Picard says 20, but it's more like 25 years. They're acting like people 25 years later would act. That's the whole point. The whole point of that show is to do what anybody would do if you're bringing back characters after 30 years. How have these characters changed? What is different about them? What have they learned in their journey? When we left Riker on the Nemesis, the movie Nemesis, he hadn't had a son before, and he hadn't had his son die. What does that do to somebody? And one of the things that I really like about Star Trek Picard Season 3 so much is the characters and their interactions. People are getting caught up with stuff that's happening in the moment. Oh, Picard and Riker would never talk to Picard that way. They haven't served together for 2 decades. They're not in the military anymore. They're retired or whatever. They don't have to practice that decorum. Life has happened to them. They're not the people we met. And I think astute and mature viewers sort of understand that. And I think it's really interesting to see that a lot of the people that are online that you would think wouldn't get along or wouldn't agree, they all tend to see that because that is the essence of great storytelling. If you're telling the story of, pick any character. I mean, you want to know what you want to know why I love Star Trek Picard so much? Go watch The Color of Money. It's not a science fiction movie. It stars Paul Newman, Tom Cruise, and Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio. It's also got other actors you'd recognize. Why do I ask you to watch that movie? Because it is a sequel to The Hustler. It's a Paul Newman movie where he plays Fast Eddie Felson. The Color of Money is just like Star Trek Picard Season 3. We find Fast Eddie Felson, now he's a liquor salesman. Very different guy than he was before. He went through an experience that beat him down. And he's not the same person. He's a different guy. But, by the way, as an aside, now that I think about it, I don't think I've ever used this Color of Money reference in terms of Star Trek, but if you want to hear something interesting, both The Hustler and The Color of Money were novels that were written by Walter Tevis. Why is that important? Because Walter Tevis also wrote the book, The Man Who Fell to Earth, that Nicholas Roeg's movie that starred Buck Henry and David Bowie was based on. That's the movie that Alex Kurtzman went and made a sequel to with his show, The Man Who Fell to Earth, that allowed Terry Matalas to become the showrunner of Star Trek Picard Season 3. So maybe there's something to that I don't know if I've never asked Terry about The Color of Money. Maybe he knows about it. Maybe he hasn't seen it. I don't know. It was in the 80s. You can borrow my Blu-ray if he wants. Both Blu-rays, actually. You can borrow The Hustler and The Color of Money, Terry. But I think that, what I want from Star Trek is what I've always wanted from Star Trek, which is great stories well told with great characters that reflect our time today in an optimistic way that leads me to believe that humanity can get its shit together and that someday we will live in that utopian civilization. We'll see. I don't know. I'll tell you one thing. There's more vitriol and meanness amongst Star Trek fans than I've ever seen before. And I've been going to Star Trek events since I was 10 years old. And I can understand, I've painted a big target on myself over the years. My douchebaggery is legendary, I'm sure. But, it gives me no pleasure. I don't personally attack Discovery fans when I can help it. Because, as I've said, everybody's going to discover Star Trek. I mean, somebody's first Star Trek experience will be Prodigy. It'll be Lower Decks. Although Lower Decks won't make a sense to anybody who hasn't ever watched Star Trek before. Watch, somebody's already tweeting me right now. Well, Rob, Lower Decks was my first Star Trek, and I understood it. You didn't know what a Mugatu was. Come on, man. I saw it in Zoolander. Anyway, you know what I'm saying. But so everybody's going to come to Star Trek just like everybody comes to James Bond. Everybody has a different answer. Who's your favorite James Bond? Oh, Daniel Craig. He's my favorite James Bond. I'm like, yeah, have you ever seen Roger Moore's or Sean Connery's James Bond movies? No. But that's okay. I don't expect you to. I mean, hell, even I will admit, even though I have an original Dr. No one sheet hanging up in our movie room, Dr. No is a rough watch. I like it, but it moves at a snail's pace. And it's hard. It's a hard, rough watch. But yeah. Anyway, I'll see what people have been. There's a few. Our own historian Darth Plato sends in a tip and says there's another angle concerning the moon. In history, empty space, sparsely populated, invites settlement, colonization, even if not right away. Given time, the solar system and beyond as well. The greatest age of human expansion may lie ahead. That's a really great point. Space is empty, and it's begging to be colonized. I think you're absolutely right about that. Look, which I think is great. I think that's what we want. We want to push forward. We want to see what's out there. And I think, look, everyone's always trying to say, well, what kind of a post-scarcity future is it? Is it Marxism? Is it socialism? I don't know. We can't really say. I'll say this, though. I don't believe in collectivism. Human beings want to excel. It doesn't matter what they want. You might want to excel in breeding orchids, like Susan Orlandi. Or you might want to be a painter or a sculptor, or you want to play sports, or whatever it is you want to be. Human endeavor and succeeding at something, being great at it, is a good thing. It's a good thing. And I'll tell you, again, I've told these stories before, but growing up in Seattle, I was a Boy Scout girl. Well, I was a Cub Scout in Weebelo. I never fully went into Boy Scouts, but we'd have the Pinewood Derby where you build a wooden car with your father. You have the wheels and you carve out a block of wood and you make a car and you race it with gravity down the hill. Well, living in Seattle, half the kids' dads work for Boeing. My dad was vice president of an insurance company. And he would show me, we put graphite on our wheels. We worked on them together, designed, painted them together. We did it all together and we would never win. We always came in like second. Most of the time we came in second, respectable. But my dad would always apologize to me. And my dad would always say, I'm sorry, I'm not a Boeing engineer. I mean, sometimes kids would come in with basically what looked like a wing. The wing, like a Pinewood Derby-sized wing for lift and speed, and it was sanded down. No kid did that. But, my dad and I worked on them together, but he always would apologize to me for not winning. And I didn't care because it was something my dad and I were doing. And it was fun. And it wasn't about the winning. It was about working with my dad making this car. And, I only did it for like 3 or 4 years. But it was so we had a record, a win-loss record, and it was always fun that my dad and I got to do this and joke about it because every year some kid would come in with the flying wing thing and it sanded to perfection and all that. My dad and I are like, we were like, I tried to make Formula One cars, whittling them out of that block, and so would he, and we would. And he's like, I'll put the graphite on the wheels. It was a fun thing. We knew we were never going to win. But we had a great time doing it, and I didn't resent anybody who won. My dad didn't either. Had a great time doing it together, and that was kind of the point. And it was fun. It was fun. So, yeah. So I think you're right. I think that the great age of human exploration is still to come. And I think it's going to be great. Dustin Cole sends a tip and says, I hope Terry hears your speech. He seemed very unhappy with you all earlier. Well, look, I have come to really love and respect Terry Matalas. I think he's just a wonderful guy. He's a great father, great husband, I would assume. I think he's an incredibly talented writer. And by the way, I have to recommend his series 12 Monkeys. I watched 12 Monkeys when it was on, but it wasn't like a religious watch for me. I would watch it. I don't know why my Siri came on talking about 12 Monkeys, but Terry actually gave me a great Blu-ray set of 12 Monkeys that Via Vision out of Australia made, this really nice box set, and I've been watching it, binging it, and I'm really impressed with how the show is tightly plotted and written. And Stashwick, I didn't know who Todd Stashwick was, even though we met at a party like 10 years ago. I didn't, but now having actually got to meet him and talk to him, and he's just a great guy. And watching him in 12 Monkeys is great. So yeah, I think here's the thing. Terry is very mindful of the fact, as anybody would be. Alex Kurtzman controls the Star Trek franchise, and when we're bagging on him, and I did say what Star Trek needs is a vision, and I still believe that, because, look, the thing is, like J.J. Abrams, Alex Kurtzman, it was a business decision to take on that franchise, and I get that. I'm not going to begrudge anybody for getting 5 TV shows on the air and making a bunch of Star Trek or any franchise. It ain't show friends, it's show business. And Alex Kurtzman's doing great business with Star Trek. I'm not going to begrudge him that, but he would do better business if he had visionaries. And when I mean visionaries, people that really loved Star Trek that were also great writers. The reason a guy like Terry Matalas is great for Star Trek, one, he already loves Star Trek, but he doesn't just love Star Trek. He loves anime. He loves Ghostbusters. He grew up like us. He's a big nerd. So he knows what's good and what's bad. It doesn't matter what show he was working on. If it has something to do with science fiction, fantasy, or horror, Terry Matalas is going to make that show good. He's going to make that show good. The thing is, though, there's not a lot of writers in Hollywood who are deft genre writers that really... Look, science fiction's very specific. And when you have people that aren't science fiction fans, or fans of, if you're a science fiction fan, it means you're by a de facto fan of science. You know physics, you know when things work and when they don't work. And like, or when you understand simple things, like I can't take Star Trek Discovery seriously when they show me the internal makeup of that ship and you see an elevator on a track going through empty space on a starship where space is at a premium. I'm like, okay, does nobody understand how this works? I mean, even on the Death Star, the lifts are inside something. And yeah, there's a lot of empty space in the Death Star, but it's 200 kilometers across or something? But a starship isn't that way. But when I see something like that, I'm like, these people don't know enough about their own show to show me what a turbo lift is, when we've already got a turbo lift for how many years now? For 50 years, and they show me that, and just, I'm like, if that's what you're doing with turbo lifts, and you are even staging giant fight scenes on them, I'm like, I can't watch the show. It's hard for me to take anything, and I know, well, Rob, that's a little petty. Is it? Because, look, in the second season, when the red beacons happened all around the galaxy, we see all the red beacons go on all at the same time. Do you not understand how light works? How physics work? I mean, if all these lights turned on at the same time in various parts of the galaxy, we wouldn't see them at the same time. Lights traveling at different speeds. So that was an impossible thing to have happen. We don't have eyes across the galaxy. And when I watch that plot point, here's the thing. A great science fiction writer would go, you can't do that. You have to figure out something else that's more plausible, that we can say that the red angel, or whatever the fuck it was, another way to indicate that it had come to life or whatever. That way showed a complete lack of understanding of physics or the understanding of how light does work or how big the universe actually is. You know, it's hard when that goes on. Well, I like the characters and the stories. I would say that kind of writing, you know, went to the characters as well. Now, here's the thing. I hated it. However, I would say that like Nichelle Nichols, who represented a future that Whoopi Goldberg never thought she was going to be able to be a part of, when someone sees themselves or their group represented on Star Trek, it could change lives. It changed Whoopi Goldberg's life, and then she was later on Star Trek. So when people from marginalized communities see themselves represented on screen, you cannot, how much that's worth is incalculable. But you can also write those characters well. And that's the difference. Representation isn't enough. And representation for its own sake isn't great characterization, and it's not great storytelling. And yet I know there's a lot of people that are willing to give it a pass, and I understand why. And then they come after me when they get mad, you know, because they take it personally. I'm like, I take it personally that the writing's terrible. I take it personally that there's representation and it's also representation that's at the expense. Modern Star Trek hates me. And that short take with the Tribbles, that was the lowest point in Star Trek history ever. It's one of the worst science fiction shows that's ever been put on television. If you haven't seen the Star Trek short take, you should watch it, only because think about what's actually being said in that episode. It is so egregious and horrific. If it were flipped around, whoever wrote it would be Dilberted. I mean, it was really, really horrific, really awful. So, but yeah, Dustin, I think Terry was mad that he still works for these guys. You know, he wants to work with them in the future. I get it. But, you know, like I would say to anybody, I know they want to make a bunch of more Star Trek shows. I would like to see a Star Trek show that pushes forward with new ideas that a showrunner would come up with to push look, to me, the idea of catching up with the Next Generation crew 30 years on is a cool idea. It's always a cool idea just like Color Money was a cool idea. And the character that created Fast Eddie Felson, Walter Tevis, wrote that book. I always think that's cool. I always think that's really something that it makes sense to do if it's done well. But what I want to see is a Star Trek, an action-adventure science fiction show that allegorically really goes out of its way to address the many problems. You know, I said this today on the stream. I heard a scientist talk about they've genetically engineered poplar trees. And every time I hear poplar trees, I think about Maximus Decimus Meridius because he had poplar trees on his property. And you know what happened there. But they were talking about genetically engineering poplar trees and how these poplar trees are, it supercharges their ability to complete photosynthesis, to eat carbon dioxide. And there's bioethical concerns about that. And I was thinking, you know, relating it back to the Borg, like, that would be the result. The Borg were the result of I would love to do a story. And there's been books. As a matter of fact, there was, if you haven't read the Judith and Garfield Reeves Stevens Star Trek novel, The Return, there is a nod to that book in Star Trek Picard Season 3. It's very fleeting, but it's there. It would be very interesting to discover the origins of the Borg. And it's funny because I have a really interesting idea how you could take the idea of what the Borg are even further. Much more of a hard sci-fi example. I don't know if they'll ever do anything with the Borg again, but how you could move them into, like, what do the Borg mean now? And how do you equate them back to what is humanity doing to itself? And I think pursuing a transhuman, and I'm talking, when I say transhuman, I mean transcendent of our current situation, our lifespans. You know, what would happen to humanity what would be ethical concerns, moral, ethical of a humanity that could live 1,000 years. How would that change us? I want to see that. When they went into the 31st century, wouldn't it have been interesting if everybody lived 1,000 years, but our characters could never live 1,000 years because they hadn't been engineered that way? So, I mean, it would be interesting, but something where science fiction ideas that also relate back to humanity now and grappling with them in an interesting sort of a way. That's what I would like to see from Star Trek. But, Terry's done, I mean, I have to say this, not since Ron Moore was going on AOL boards in the early 90s and talking to fans, has there been any kind of fan outreach, the kind that Terry Matalas is doing. And, in a way, I understand, like, I too, I want to see people watch Star Trek Picard because I find it very satisfying from a character standpoint. I think, like, as an example, when Picard and Beverly Crusher had their conversation in the last episode in 17 seconds, and at the same time counterpointed by Riker's conversation with Jack Crusher, that was great peak Star Trek. And there's a lot more of that to come. And that's stuff that I've been missing. I haven't believed the human characters in Picard's, well, actually in the entire Kurtzman era of Trek. I don't believe those people. They're all, none of them are written as to be real human individuals. And I think what I love so much about these characters, and people they're getting caught up in the minutia of it all, but these characters are different. They're not going to act the same way they acted 30 years ago. They're changed. They've been altered by their experiences. And the conversation when Dr. Crusher said, look, I lost my parents, I lost my husband, I lost my child to space, to your space. And this child that was a product of our union, I wanted him in my life. I didn't want to lose him. And, I know being around you is painting a target on his back. Or if not that, he'll run into another anomaly like the Traveler and light off and go become immortal somewhere. Or die in Star Trek Coda if you've read those books. But, I thought that was great. That was great, real human emotion and pathos. I thought it was great. Polaris Sucks says, I watched the Popcast stream with Terry and you. I feel bad for him. One wrong word and he will be shunned. I think he knows, but of course can't say. I don't know. I mean, I think Terry is he's a very thoughtful guy. And the fact that it's a risk he comes on any of these shows. But you know what I think he's done more for outreach and more for, I just like hearing his Star Trek philosophy. I like hearing him talk about the decisions he made and why he and his writing staff made them. And also Terry's a guy that came up in the business. He knows what's up. And I think he's a great writer. And, he directed the last 2 episodes of this season. He's a writer, director, producer. He's a triple threat. And he's really good at what he does. And I hope more people tap him for work. I mean, I think that this season of Star Trek Picard is a shining example of what he's able to do because, and what I was saying, I think what he misconstrued what I was saying, that Star Trek needs vision at the top, meaning that, Terry was involved in the minutia of all of it. He directed, he wrote, he also was there. His composer told me that they co-composed music together. I mean, Terry was involved in every facet of this production. It's a reflection of him and Star Trek and his storytelling ability, and that's what I think any franchise property needs. It needs talented writer, directors, and producers, but it also needs somebody that understands why the franchise works. And I don't think, and he's also a polite guy, and he's a nice guy, and he appreciates the fans, and he likes talking with them. But you have to understand, it's frustrating. It's frustrating to be a creative and know that all the things that people complain about, you and your writing staff already had to deal with, or you had to deal with them in the edit bay, or you had to deal with them on set, and nothing is perfect as much as you might want to make it that way. Lily Mack, what a cool name, Lily Mack. How are you? Became a member of the channel. Well, thank you for becoming a member, Lily. For those of you who don't know, we every other week we have long. We had a good one this weekend. It was long. You can watch them. We have a member call, and I get to see all you lovely members, and we shoot the shit for hours. And you can see those if you want. They're on the channel. 200 Watt Studio, our friend 200 Watt Studio. How's it going, by the way? How excited are you for To Live and Die in L.A.? I know, not at all. But I thought I'd bring it up. 200 Watt Studio says, to your point, don't you think it would have been very Trek if they extrapolated on the tech that made Picard get a new android body? They could examine how that might be a choice for a trans person. Ooh, that's an interesting idea. I like that idea. Sure. I mean, I think that what a cool story that could be. But I think that, obviously, Terry was going to make. I think if Star Trek ever went back to an episodic form, I think that would be great. But it's interesting because the Trill species, which I thought something I thought they just botched on Discovery. But the Trill species, the joined species, they've done some really interesting things with that. But yeah, look, I mean, everybody wants great storytelling, and I think when they first introduced in the host, when they first introduced Odan and Beverly, that was a really interesting story, But I would think that by the 25th century, if somebody was born trans, they'd do that brain scan and they would know that person was trans, and they could from after being born, because it's going to be one day we will have that technology. One day we will see, okay, you had too much estrogen or not enough testosterone or whatever, and however it happens, but somebody's brain, they have what would be a female brain in a male body, they'll prove that shit. They'll prove it. It'll be medically provable. I believe that anyway. I believe that. I believe that's actually true. And once they prove that kind of thing, then all bets are off. Then it's like, oh well, now we have to. Of course, we're going to support people. They were born this way. A lot of people can't conceive of that, but I think one day it'll be proven true. I really believe that, and you'll be like, yep. And there'll be no. It won't be ideology. It'll be fact. And once it is, I mean, it already is. We just don't have the tools to prove it. But I really believe it would be. But that's a really I just think by the 24th or 25th century, it wouldn't even become an issue, because then people would just go be who they are. You'd get that replicator assisted medical surgery, and you'd just be put the way you want to be. But it would be an interesting, allegorically, you could tell a really interesting story about that. Like, what if somebody, because addressing that's not fun allegorical sci-fi. It's always better when you're allegorically attaching or exploring an idea, so then you don't trigger people. That's the great thing that's what Rod Serling and Roddenberry knew in the 60s. You can't talk about the Vietnam War. Oh, okay. We'll have the Klingons arming the village people, and we'll arm the hill people. That's not Vietnam. That's an alien planet. Or we'll talk about racism, by having people that are black on one side and white on the other. Stupid, but a striking visual nonetheless. But that's how they would do it. They couldn't. And by the way, in a science fiction TV show, you don't want to be preached to either. You want these lessons to be wrapped up in an interesting sci-fi bow. I think, but that's an interesting idea. I like that idea. Darren L. from Minnesota says the infighting in the Trek community stinks in 2023. It really does. I mean, but I understand that, because look, now everything is tribal. So it's like, if you don't like what I like, and if you're openly mocking it, then you're attacking me personally, because what you're attacking is part of my identity. Listen, Star Trek is part of my identity, but I'm the first person to point at something and go, that fucking sucked. I fucking hated Generations. I was like, what is this bullshit? I mean, who cares if watching a model spaceship crash on a model set was cool? And it was. I thought it was cool. But, that's not enough. Why'd the Enterprise D get shot down by a Klingon bird of prey? Fuck those girls. The Duras sisters. Hate them. I mean, I liked them until Generations. Tully and Soren. What a dumbass. Just fly ship in there, man. Figure it out. Why you gotta blow up planets? But I didn't like the way Kirk died. I thought that was lame. And no one knows that more than Brandon Braga and Ron Moore. They'll tell you the same thing. But the infighting in the community, it's like, yeah, man, why are we fighting? We all love Star Trek. I might not like your brand of Star Trek, but it's still Star Trek. But I'll tell you, more people, especially younger people, hate on the original series than hate on Discovery. And it's, it's frustrating. What's weird now is that it's okay. Like I'm now a person that not only am I the root of all evil, but it's okay to hate me. And even in Star Trek, the second season, that there's a part of the crew that comes over from the Enterprise onto the Discovery. There's that one dick, that officious white dude that just gets murdered and nobody cares. They set him up in the show that he's a dick, so let's kill him. If Stashwick's character, if Liam Shaw was on Discovery, they would have killed him. And they would have made it look like, he was a dick. Let's kill him. Star Trek never would have done this before. It never did those kinds of things. And Star Trek Discovery did it all the time. All the time. And that's one of the reasons I watch a show that Star Trek Discovery hated me. That was a thing that was, there's a Star Trek show that I can actually say hated me. The experience of watching it was the opposite of what I used to feel from Star Trek. I'm like, wow, here's a show that would rather have me dead. And so would their fan base. That's fucking weird and fucked up. So anyway, yeah, 200 Watt Studio goes on to say, I'm loving what Terry is doing with the season. And you haven't seen, remember, another thing that's very shrewd that Terry and his writing staff did was, and I've said this a million times, you've heard it a million times, but I'll say it again because it's worth considering, because I think they're pioneering something. The way that they set up this season and the way they set the story up is a 3-act structure, the way you would a screenplay. Act 1 is episodes 1 through 4. Act 2 is 5 through 8. And Act 3, the great mic drop climax, is episodes 9 and 10. And it works beautifully in that way. And you'll see the next episode, episode 4, is a fucking banger of a Star Trek episode. And when you guys see it, you're going to be like, oh my God, it's that good. And what an ending does that episode have? You'll see. And then come back to me. But you're right. Darren L. from Minnesota comes back and says, Marxism? Socialism? I choose optimism. Live long and prosper. Me too. Both of those systems will never work because they don't allow for human excellence. They don't allow for human individual achievement. They don't allow, and eventually, why do you think those systems don't work? Because you have to have some kind of authority. Somebody's got to be in charge, and that authority will eventually become the problem. It's happened every time. Well, Rob, they just haven't done it right. Uh-huh. Yeah. Son of John says, thank you, Rob, for keeping us hopeful and encouraged. And you can always park your shuttle in my shuttle bay. Thanks, man. That's all we can be. There's pessimism's easy. But if you think about it, we're here for a very short period of time. And no, why not? I'll tell you something. It is a lifestyle choice to be happy. It's a choice. You have to make it. There's too much for me, I don't have time to be upset because every time I get mad or depressed or I think about, oh my God, working in the film business is so terrible. How many projects, how many scripts have I written? How many things didn't happen? You could be that way and let it eat you up. But on the other hand, there's lots of cool shit. I got my 4-foot model of the Andromeda I'm buying. I got new puppies in the house. I'm building. There's John Wick 4 is coming out. I mean, come on. There's too much great stuff. You can concentrate on the bad stuff, but you can choose to concentrate on the good stuff too. That doesn't mean to be naive. And the world, don't get me wrong, the world's a horrible place. But it's always been a horrible place. I mean, can you imagine what do people think about that we're living through World War II? What was it like when you found out that there was a bomb that could take out a whole city? I mean, we've lived with it, but imagine the first people that were there. I have become death, destroyer of worlds, man. I can't wait to see Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer! There's another thing to be excited about. Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer, where they actually did figure out a way to blow up something that didn't go nuclear, but apparently it was a really big explosion. I knew he was going to do something like that. God bless him. But thanks for the invitation. Where is your shuttle bay at? I'll fly over in my Galileo. Warren L. with a $50 super chat. Oh my God. Warren L., that's so generous. Thank you so much. Warren says, in high school, my parents forbade me to a New Year's Eve party. That night, I watched Wrath of Khan on VHS and spent New Year's Eve with Captain Kirk. Our VHS was from the live broadcast on CBS. You haven't experienced Khan without the 1980s commercial breaks. Wrath of Khan was one of the very first sell-through VHS videotapes of all time, meaning that videotapes were expensive. They started at like $55, but Paramount was the first studio that the first two sell-through tapes were Officer and a Gentleman and Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan, and they were $39.95 in 1982. I think Christmas of '82, $39.95, and that was a big deal. I think that might have been a little. Maybe it was after the turn, and then Flashdance was one. Raiders came out afterwards. The VHS tape of Raiders. It didn't come out right away, but yeah. So, good times. But thank you for supporting the channel, Warren. It's funny. Do you still have that tape? Because I do love seeing '80s commercial breaks. I bet we were all kids, like cutting out the commercials, taping stuff off TV. I love that. Tom Jr. Jackson says, "Great stream tonight again, Rob." Well, thanks, Tom. You're just buttering me up. But Tom Jr. Jackson, goof emeritus, or as I like to say, goof emeritus, because the idea of goof people, emeritus, that malapropism, goof emeritus. He was the man that coined the phrase "we're all goof people," and it's truer things have never been spoken. So it's good to see you. Jason Love became a member of the channel. Jason Love. Well, thanks for becoming a member of the channel, Jason. I very much appreciate that. Our friend Mattuine, how are you? Good to see you. How are you? It was good to see you the other day. Irene Jobson gets my vote for member party MVP. 100%. By the way, Irene Jobson's voice is to die for. She is one of my new favorite people. And hopefully she'll come to every member party. But absolutely. 200 Watt Studio says, "I love the attention to the writing this season. For God's sake, the accent of Picard's son was explained. Loved it." I know, right? How great. Yeah. I totally, and it just keeps getting better. You get to find something out about, well, I'm not going to say anything. It just, the way that the way Jack Crusher develops over the season, and he takes, there's two different things happening in his life, and both of them are very interesting to see how they develop. Very Star Trekian of it all. 200 Watt Studio says, "Kirk died on the wrong bridge. He should have died on the Enterprise bridge, heroically saving Picard and crew." 100%. Yeah. But to be fair, Brandon and Ron were tasked with writing All Good Things and Generations, like at the same time. I can't even imagine the pressure on those guys. And they were young too. I mean, Brandon, we're talking 94, man. And it was the end of TNG, and 6 months later they had Generations come out. Madness. And, to me, Generations has a lot of nonsensical hooey in it, not just the way Kirk died, but I don't buy that a spacefaring energy ribbon can read your mind and open a door to some, like, that presupposes that there's some intelligence behind the Nexus, but there really isn't. It's just a weird, I don't think any of it works. But hey, Dennis McCarthy's score is pretty good. It's beautifully photographed. It has great ILM effects in it. It's, there's things to like about Generations. Yes, but he died on the wrong bridge. He should have died on the Enterprise bridge, heroically saving Picard and crew. That is right, 200 Watt Studio. He should have. That's exactly where he should have. Plus, he would have loved that bridge. I would have loved to see a scene where Kirk steps onto the bridge of the Enterprise D, and he's like, "What is this? What is this, a hotel room? What's going on here?" I would love that. It would have been so much fun, and to see him take that center seat next to Deanna, like giving her the once over. Come on, that was such gold to have been mined. Picard goes off after Soren, and Kirk has to come to the bridge of the Enterprise and command. And he gets everybody out into the drive section or whatever. Gotta love that, man. 200 Watt Studio says, "I agree. Look at the Doomsday Machine. Even though Commodore Decker was unhinged and overbearing, he was still a great captain. He had been through literal hell. He was. William Wyndham. See, that's another thing. You go back and you watch the actors, the character actors that they had play those parts, and this, my man, Binary Sunset Media sent me this. This is one of my favorite Star Trek shirts I've ever seen. I love the design and the color, and it's my friend Sean and I made a shirt like this that, well, he passed away, but we made shirts for the Star Trek fan club, and this was our second wave, and we never got to make it, but this piece of artwork was cooler than the one we had. But yeah, Decker was unhinged, but look, he was unhinged. He was racked with grief and yeah, man, poor Commodore Decker. That was not good. Kenneth says the Borg are the polar opposites of V'ger from the motion picture. Learn all that is knowable, transmuted into assimilation. Voyager 5, Borg. I don't know. I mean, look, I have an idea about what to do with the Borg, but it's an evolution. The Borg have evolved into something very, very different than they've been portrayed currently. It's a pretty big idea, though. But Kenneth, this is the first super chat you ever sent to this channel, so I want to thank you for that. The polar opposites of V'ger, and you're right, transmuted into assimilation. Voyager 5, Borg. Well, it's really funny. If you read the Reeve Stevens book, The Return, they do tie in the motion picture to the Borg, and it's pretty interesting, and it's pretty great. RRTNZ, how you doing, man? I don't hate fans of Discovery or its actors, but the show was bollocks, and it's hard not to smirk a little as fans of it stamp their feet and wail about its greatness in the face of cancellation. Here's the thing. This is the thing that depresses me about, and I'm not going to. I understand why people. I'm not gonna pick on people that like Voyager, because that's not fair, or that like Discovery. The problem is that I think that Discovery shortchanged those people. They didn't know that they were being shortchanged, and I'm not saying that they deserve better. And I think I want Discovery to be a better show. And there's plenty of examples. Whether you want to go from House of the Dragon to The Last of Us to hell. I mean, it's funny. Elizabeth was binging New Amsterdam, and the medical show New Amsterdam, and you know what? It's very Star Trekian. It's only 4 seasons. I was watching it because Janet Montgomery, who I work with when I produce The Hills Run Red, we cast Janet Montgomery in the movie, and she's one of the stars of New Amsterdam. And I was watching this, and I'm like, this show, like The West Wing, there's a very Star Trek vibe to it. And I'm like, boy, I wish the characters in Discovery were more like the characters in New Amsterdam. Different kinds of characters. Everyone was represented in New Amsterdam, but they were all written very well. And I was like, that's kind of cool. I like that. It's pretty good. Warren L says, Rob, if you could find that VHS, will you do a live screening of it? I think it's somewhere in my parents' attic. Watching movies on the broadcast networks back then is completely lost to today's audiences. I know, right? It was, oh man, watching a James Bond movie took forever. That's because of the commercials. Well, I couldn't do a live screening like on YouTube because we would get demonetized. But it might be fun to actually do an event somewhere, like a live event, and have people come and watch this VA. I mean, the picture would be not good, but it would be fun. You know what you could do? You could take the VHS tape and you could upload it into an editorial system, whether it's Adobe Premiere, and you could cut the 4K image over the top of it, but still keep the commercial breaks. So watching the movie would be really palatable, but the commercial breaks would stay intact. So you'd get that. I mean, they'd be shitty. You could upres them a little bit, but you could watch the movie in 4K. So modern audiences, it would still be a fun thing to watch. But then exactly where all you would do is upres the image of the movie itself, but leave all the commercial breaks and anything the network does. That would be something worth doing, because that way people would pay attention. That's why not? See if we can find that tape. That'd be dope. Exotic Runts says the How to Blow Up a Pipeline trailer came out and it looks really good. You should check it out if you haven't already. I watched that trailer yesterday. I thought How to Blow Up a Pipeline was going to be a documentary. It's not. It's based on a book, and it does look really good. I can't wait to see it. I got to tell you, over the last day, I watched Ghosted with Ana de Armas and Chris Evans, a movie I had never even heard of that I totally want to watch. It looks hilarious, even though just watch the trailer. If you guys are sci-fi fans, and if you're watching the stream and you're not sci-fi fans, why would you watch the stream? But Silo is a new series on Apple Plus. It's based on the Wool novellas, and that trailer looks bananas. And I knew that people been trying to make those books for like a decade. I didn't realize that Apple Plus had made it. I mean, it looks really expensive. Watch Silo, definitely right at the top of my list, because it's around here somewhere. I have the collection, the first Wool hardcover collection, but everybody check out Silo. Then there's The Citadel, which is the new series that stars Richard Madden, Rob Stark, who was the lead in Bodyguard, and Jonas Priyanka Chopra Jones. I can't pronounce her name. I'd have to see it written and I could sound it out. But she plays a spy and Richard Madden plays a spy. Stanley Tucci's in it. It's called Citadel. That looks really good. So there's a lot of stuff that dropped that's exciting. And How to Blow Up a Pipeline. Marcus Rice became a member of the channel. Thank you, Marcus Rice. Connie Sang, the lovely, sexy Connie Sang is here. And she also loves the Hellraiser franchise and plays video games. She's just starting on, Jedi Lone Survivor? Is that what it is? Jedi Survivor? Connie Sang says, hello, my friend. I have nothing Star Trek to say, but I can talk your ear off about Death Stranding next time I see you. That game is wild. Kojima is the man. And you know what? I want to play that game. I like the Metal Gear franchise, and I've always wanted to play Death Stranding. You need to come over and experience our new media room. You really do, because wait till you hear it. Just come over and watch. We have a new room. Got the couches. You can melt into them. They're fantastic. You have an open invitation. Toyota Watts Studio says, there is no planet. There is no third planet. Don't you think I know that? There was, but not anymore. They called me. They begged me. 400 of them. It's my William Wyndham. So good. Alex Detman. That is a phenomenal ending to Kirk's arc. Wait a minute. That's a phenomenal ending to Kirk's arc in Final Frontier. I always knew I'd die alone, with him saving the crew and going out by himself on the ship he loved. P.S. Check 1701 email. Marcel sent pics. Let me know if you got it. Oh, I will check that. I will look that and see if I got that. I will do that. Calvin Bowles, our friend Calvin Bowles, one of our favorite fathers. His son Braxton, young Braxton, who turned 8, met Shatner as hero at the convention. I think was that pre-COVID. Marvel needs to get away from its inside baseball stuff and start making films that are accessible to even first-time viewers. You're not wrong. And let me tell you something. I watched Endgame over the weekend. By the way, I watched it in Dolby Vision and IMAX Enhanced on Disney Plus this weekend. I have the 4K Steelbook. It looks and sounds phenomenal. And I forgot, what it's like to watch a movie that's not shot on the volume stages and just it's not entirely green screen. They actually get outside. It was great. Connie says, a year ago today, we watched Aliens. And yes, I'm playing Jedi Fallen Order now. We'll visit you soon. You got to come visit because the whole new system it'll blow you away. You will dig it. Anonymous Anonymous writes in and sends in a tip. Anonymous says, so who's this Velma series for exactly? I don't care if they gender swap the characters, but give me a good story and jokes that make me laugh. It's like a Harley Quinn show with 0 calories. And then Anonymous goes on to say, what would you rather watch again? Another season of Discovery or Super Bowl 49? Why do you have to hurt me like this? The Jedi Knights of the Pacific Northwest. Listen, man, Uncle Pete was playing some strategic ball. He's like, okay, I got 4 downs. It never occurred to him that he was going to that Russell Wilson would throw a pick on first down. I mean, he was playing strategic football. That was a fluke. It was like Gus Grissom in The Right Stuff. It was a fluke. It was a technical malfunction. You always got to bring it up. That's why I love you, Anonymous. You're anonymous, but I still love you. So there you go. But I don't know who Velma's for. You know, I understand they're trying to make something. I don't know what they're trying to make, but they're trying to make something. I don't know what it is. I don't know. Dustin Cole became a member. Thanks for becoming a member. That is very nice of you. Now, for those of you who don't know, for people that are watching this show for the first time, it's funny because I did bring a bunch of liberal articles on liberalism and Star Trek to read, but that last one was so long. I usually read letters on this show. So you can send me a letter to the Burnettwork.net or postgeeksingularity.net. postgeeksingularity.com. And I'm going to read some letters. Let's see. I'm going to find some good letters and read them. Or I'll read a letter because the show's gone on for a long time. But, you know, you got to read. I love your letters. I mean, that's half the fun of this network. Here. You know what? Here's a letter that I'm going to I think is worth reading. And I think it's worth reading. I don't know. Maybe it's not worth reading. I don't know yet. We'll have to delve into it, but we'll delve into it together. This is pretty funny. This comes to us from Richard Parker. Richard Parker writes, in support of the Matrix Resurrection. Recently, on the John Campea show, the Matrix Resurrection came up as an example of a sequel that harmed the franchise and should not have been made, as part of the discussion of Warner Brothers scrapping the Batgirl film in the middle of post-production. I personally like the film, and I feel the need to vent in the direction of someone else who also liked the film, Robert Meyer Burnett. Yes, I did, and I have the 4K, and it's an incredible-looking 4K, by the way. One of my issues with my fellow human beings is the number of them who just want to see some random-ass wreck fools and blow shit up. Random asshole. Wreck fools and blow shit up. While this can be cathartic at times, one long chase sequence, spattered with explosions and no context to any of it, becomes boring. Matrix Revolutions. While Resurrection was practically guaranteed to disappoint viewers who watch the franchise only for the superficial spectacle, this does not make it a bad film. I agree. Over-budgeted? Yes. Incorrectly marketed? Almost certainly. Here is my brief summary of the franchise. The Matrix. The world isn't real. The Matrix Reloaded. The real world isn't real either. The Matrix Revolutions. Video game boss fight because studio execs? The Matrix Resurrection. For those that didn't get it the first 3 times, the subtext will now be presented as text. I think everyone understood that the world inside the Matrix was a simulation. What people seem to have missed is that Zion and the machine world are also part of the simulation. The architect is an unreliable narrator. The whole history of the war between man and the machines is a false narrative. It is a fictional story within the simulation. Everything we see in the first 3 films is part of the simulation within the framework of the world within the films. Nothing is real. I'll buy that. The Matrix Resurrection is the first time we see anything of the franchise's real world. It is an interesting and well-structured narrative about a paranoid schizophrenic going through a psychotic break with reality. The Matrix is the manifestation of his delusion. This is how deep the rabbit hole goes. It is a descent into madness. Was Lana Wachowski giving the finger to the action spectacles demanding execs at Warner Brothers? Certainly feels like it. And yet the film still made it through the production process from script approval to final editing. And that comes to us from Richard Parker. Richard Parker, you and I definitely park our shuttlecraft in the same shuttle bay. I agree with you. I think, here's the problem. The Matrix is groundbreaking sci-fi. Loved it. I saw that movie for the first time on the Warner Brothers lot. Nobody thought much of it. It was kind of a joke. I just went there because I'd watch anything at the theater that's on the Warner Brothers lot because the Steve Ross Theater is unbelievable. It's an incredible, incredible theater. I saw Dune there, thanks to Michelle. It's an incredible theater. And, I was, the first time I saw The Matrix, nobody knew anything about it. I'd seen like the trailer, but I think I might have seen it like a month in advance, and maybe I hadn't seen a trailer. When he gets red pilled and wakes up in the battery, I was like, my mind was blown. I loved it. I loved The Matrix. By the way, if you collect physical media, the 4K of The Matrix series, all of them, they look incredible on 4K. They retime them. They really look amazing. You know what? I'm going to read one more letter. This comes from Jonathan Namila. Jonathan Namila writes, the Post-Geek Singularity community, that's what you're watching now, is an awe-inspiring community. Hello, all Post-Geek Singularity members. I just wanted to tell you, you are awe-inspiring to me. I can't wait to meet all of you in person. Can we have Post-Geek Singularity meet and greets? I'd love to do that. Rob, personally, you are my hero for life. My king of awe and wonder. Rob, never give up and never surrender. Oh, I won't. Go to infinity and beyond. I will. And shoot for those stars. I'll keep reaching for the stars and keep my feet on the ground. It's an honor and privilege to have all of the Post-Geek Singularity community on this beautiful earth. This YouTube channel is out of this world. Thank you, Rob, for being the father I wish I had. Uh-oh. Well, thank you. That's a very nice thing to say. To be truly alive, you live in awe and wonder. And remember to be Peter Pan, fly, crowd flight, and you are the pan. Never lose a child's sense of awe and wonder. Well, clearly I haven't, looking around here. It makes you great. Remember, don't become Peter too much and get lost and angry with life. And put down that phone and talk to each other. In the immortal words of my hero Stan Lee, enough said. Well, that's a very nice thing to say, Jonathan. Look, you know what? I'll tell you one thing. Rightly or wrongly, I am who I am. I can't be anybody else, much as I have tried. I've tried, but unfortunately, I can't. Well, listen, everyone. I'm going to end this stream. I'm going to make sure, let's see. Warren L. just sent in support. RRTNZ said, Hail, Rob, any thoughts on Apple's Foundation adaptation? I loved Asimov's novels. I read all of them as youth. I don't trust modern writers to adapt them. They tried. Here's the thing. I have a kind of a love-hate relationship with the Foundation series. On one hand, I really like watching it, and I thought it was all very interesting. I don't know how much Asimov's Foundation series it is, but it's certainly... I never thought I would get that kind of big-scale sci-fi writ large on my screen. So while it's not perfect, I mean, it's so interesting to me that, hey, that's a literary adaptation. Wool, that if you guys haven't watched the trailer since I've told you about it, Silo, watch that trailer. Literary adaptation. We're getting all of this stuff. They're adapting science fiction novels, and they're going to start adapting even more. And I'm so there for it. I mean, maybe we'll get an adaptation of the Hyperion Cantos. Maybe I'll finally get to see Hyperion and Fall of Hyperion. Maybe we'll get to see Peter Watt's Blind Sight. I don't know who's going to fucking make that book, but man, I'd love to see it. I mean, you know me, I would love to do Anvil of Stars if I could do anything. I'd love to be involved in doing that. Unfortunately, there's a lot of money against it because it's been in development hell for so long. But that's the TV show I'd love to make, Anvil of Stars. But you don't need to do the first book, The Forge of God, or maybe you could. And by the way, for all of you, I want to remind everybody that the Chinese adaptation of The Three-Body Problem is available to watch from Tencent on YouTube for free, all 30 hours of it. And while it's a little deliberately paced and some of the music will drive you insane, if you like hard sci-fi, The Three-Body Problem is really interesting, and it's a pretty faithful adaptation of the book. Oh, he's pissed off I'm in here. Bradley Michael says, were you broadcasting from bed earlier? I was actually in my bedroom, which I've been kicked out of because we have Tallulah, her whelping box, and the puppies are in there, and we can't let Sebastian and Gilbert, who are pretty big dogs, around the puppies yet because they're only 3 days old. So I have been sleeping in the TV room, their movie room, which, let's face it, has my entire surround sound system and Dolby Atmos system in there, so that's not a bad thing. I've been sleeping with the dogs. But I was looking after the puppies, just overseeing and making sure everything was not, 8 puppies and a dog, it's rough. So I was just sitting in there and I was watching YouTube. I was watching the Popcast guys stream today, and I wasn't planning on it. And then suddenly it was like watching all these people there, and Terry was there, and Dave Cullen was there, and Critical Drinker was there, and Nerdrotic's there. The Popcast guys are like I'm in a separate building from our house. All this stuff is in the Robservations, or AKA the Robservations, the garage. And I couldn't, the whole point was I was overseeing the puppies. I couldn't leave, but I was like, hey, I have an iPhone 14. I have that technology you need to get on the internet with your phone. So I just was like, I'll just do it. So there I was sitting in bed. I wasn't in bed. My clothes were on and all that. I wasn't in my pajamas or anything. But that's where I was, and I thought that was pretty fun. That was a really great stream. So yeah, I was broadcasting from bed, Bradley. I cannot tell a lie. Alex, is it Arellano or Arellano Luna? That's a cool name. Muhammad Ali versus Mike Tyson. Okay, here's the thing. I grew up with, that would be an interesting fight, but I grew up with Muhammad Ali. You know, Muhammad Ali's, I love Mike Tyson. He's a ferocious fighter, but I love Muhammad Ali. But if you're asking me who would win, I got to go with Ali. I really do. So there we go. Well, that will do it. I want to thank, first of all, Tom Jr. Jackson for being a great moderator. I want to thank all of you wonderful people, you imagination connoisseurs out there, for watching this stream. You can send me letters right down below to the Burnettwork.net or to postgeeksingularity.com. And I'll be back on the John Campy Show tomorrow, I would imagine. I thought I was going to be on it today. But you never know. Crazy stuff happens. And this week's episode of Picard Season 3 is a banger. It is called No Win Scenario, and that is truly what it is about. And I can't tell you how great it is. And it's got one of the most Star Trek endings you're ever going to see. So anyway, on that note, thanks again, everybody. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And I'm listening. My dog's going crazy. I don't know who's out there or what's out there. But thanks for being here, and live long and prosper. And we'll see you around the cosmos. Gilbert, stop! You idiot.